Hello, this is Joel Whitney with the Syracuse University College of Law, and I'd like to welcome you to this edition of the New York State Science and Technology Law Center webcast. Today's webcast is hosted by Shubha Ghosh, the Crandall Melvin Professor of Law and Director of the Technology Commercialization Law Program. Shubha?
Yeah, thank you, Joel, and Happy New Year to everybody. We're launching this year's webinar series, and I'm really excited because we've got a very interesting and provocative opening salvo in our continuing discussion about intellectual property and technology commercialization. I have with us today, live from Chicago, Valdavia Ellis and Stacy Ellis, who are co-CEOs and co-founders of House of Made. And we're going to have a discussion about a topic that's fairly cutting edge and fairly interesting and probably deserves more attention than it's gotten, and that's custom fitting design. And we're going to talk about the patent and commercialization issues associated with it. And in a few minutes, I'll have the Ellises discuss what their business model is. But just to give you some of the branding, here's the House of Made, which is the logo and a picture from their website. And here is some of their advertising regarding the kind of clothing and fashion that they design. I like the logos here. Beautiful liberation. It's like putting on confidence. I don't think you can say it better than that. And so let's open up our discussion. I think to give sort of an agenda for the next hour, there are three big topics, starting with providing some background on how House of Made came into existence and its background and what it does. And then we'll talk about some of the interesting intellectual property issues and strategies that the company has been pursuing. And then we'll end by talking about some of the ongoing commercialization strategy issues. So enough said on my part. Let me turn it over to you to give us some sense of how you would define your business and explain your business to the public.
Thank you, Joel and Shubha, for inviting us to this webinar. I may be a little nervous. This is my first time, so excuse me.
It's okay.
But
hello, everyone.
Yes, you say hello. So our business background is Stacy and I met at Howard University. And I was a fashion student there, and I had transferred from architecture. And I had met Stacy in architecture also before he took a turn into fashion. And we went into fashion separately at the time. And by the time I graduated, we met back up and decided that we would do clothing for what we would call the body type of African descent. And in 2004, in 2005, we were awarded our first patent on the body type of African descent. In 2005, we thought that we were able to promote the business start to scale it. And what Stacy and I tend to do is pray about how we should take what steps we should take. And we, in our prayer, were told that now we need to create a sizing system for other body types. And those other body types included Caucasian, mixed body type of African descent, just to expand the array of body types that we make clothing for. In the beginning, when we started this process, we had no idea that we would end up doing a patent. With the first one, we just thought that, this is something that we were supposed to do. We wanted to make an impact in the fashion industry. We didn't want to be like, just an aesthetic designer. We wanted to actually have some meaning behind what we did. And the more we did research to try and find out the missing pieces to what we needed to create this sizing system, we ended up having to talked to many attorneys and them advising us that we may want to do a patent. And we had no idea what that entailed at the time. And we ended up doing the research and finding out that we did have to do a patent and that there was nothing that was published or that we could find that would help us create the standard. So we had to do it. We had to create the standard with gathering data and information and interviewing people and testing our system that we created. We had to do it all ourselves. So after we did the patent in 2005, we were awarded that patent. It was a fight because the patent office did not believe that there was a difference between the different body types. And even though we can see that there are differences in shapes with different groups of people, it was not sufficient for them initially that we would say it, and we had to go back and forth with the patent office, supplying different proofs that what we were trying to convince them of was legitimate. And so actually it happened in 2005. They finally gave it to us. And then in 2005 again, we did decide to do the other body types. And I think, when did they award this last patent?
The design patent or utility patent? The design patent was awarded in 2012, and the new one was just recently granted in 2017. So,
and those include the other body types that we added in, and so now we're at the point where we are trying to figure out how to scale and how to start. And most of our time of this business has been mostly research and development and trying to figure out how to scale it, where to start, what products to start with, because we initially started with denim. And our clients, in testing some of these things, were asking for other things, other items. So we don't know where we're going to start really, but we're just listening to our clients and trying to make sure that we provide them with the things that they need and work on, I guess, scaling.
Yeah, commercialization plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's great. I mean, I wanted to show that we'll talk about these patents, some of the patents that you mentioned in some more detail. I did want to show people who are watching, what we are being referred to, but we'll get to that in more detail in a minute. I guess a couple of questions that people might have. I'll just ask both of them now. One is, what led you to identify this need, and what is it about the marketplace that wasn't meeting this need before you got there?
Yes.
And maybe the next question is probably the one makes maybe more sense to answer first. You both design and manufacture the fashion, the clothing. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. How do you manufacture it? It's a traditional manufacturing, or do you outsource that, or?
We tried to outsource it several times.
Yes.
And we had some bad experiences with loss, and then we've had some good experiences, but still ended up being a loss because those companies were bought out by larger companies.
Yeah.
And so we know that we're just us to try to scale this is, sort of like an uphill battle. But we decided that since we kept having this bad luck with trying to outsource it and do it the way that, a school would teach you, instruct you, if it's only two of you to do this production, then you go out and outsource it. But we continue to have bad experiences, so we decided to do it ourselves. And
were you working in the U.S. with companies? Is that the outsourcing in the U.S. or?
I've only done it in the U.S.
We had samples a few years back made in Italy. We went to Italy for a few months, twice.
Yes, we did.
And one of the things that we realized is that our patterns, because of the body types that we service, of course, our patterns are going to be different. And we have 8 body types. So now you're looking at, say, for instance, a woman's size 4 skinny jean. That skinny jean in the same fabric, you're going to have 8 different patterns for that one style. Now, when you're asking a manufacturer to make that for you, traditionally, that's not how it happens. They look at it each different styles. So you have to have a tech pack for each one. And so for them, that's a little overwhelming, and it's a confusing way to look at it in their mindset, And even when it comes to assembling our garment, our shapes are different. So even on the assembly line itself, the workers have to be trained, and they have to, look at it with a fresh eye. And to basically revamp that manufacturing line a lot of the companies that we outsourced to had a dedicated line just for our stuff, but they also raised the price a little bit too. So, but it wasn't advantageous for them, for what they were saying. And so for us, we look forward to becoming a manufacturer because we have to. It's not that we don't have interest in seeking, partnerships or client, from contractors. It's just that because we understand the assembly of the manufacturing process and we know what the end product should be, we now have to create our own SOP for manufacturing to understand how to scale it.
SOP, standard operating procedure, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I think you have a plant in Los Angeles and in Chicago? Is that right? Plants in both, or?
Well,
is that right?
We had small design offices in LA, and we had one in Chicago, but we closed both those down because we need to have an actual full-fledged larger factory, and so that's what we're actually working on now. We're looking to two options. We're either going to go overseas in the Caribbean to manufacture. Or we're going to do a domestic site here in the U.S., particularly in the South. We're looking at a facility right now in Georgia.
Okay,
so that's what
all the details, but that's good to know that that's the next stage. And I would imagine is when you mentioned the standard operating procedures, you had to develop new standards and maybe even new machines as well. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, there's going to be some new developments when it comes to assembling this. Yes, so. And
so you're also, you're both really well trained in design, and what I mean by design is actually figuring out what the clothing line should look like.
Yes.
Do you want to explain a little bit about that process? So how do you design, for example, let's go back to your advertising, jeans like this. I assume you do both tops and pants, or both tops and jeans and other items of clothing, right?
Yes.
And so forth, yeah.
So the question is, how do we design?
Yeah, what's that creative process like, and what's the, when you're sitting at the desk, or if you do a computer assisted, you want to give us a sense of what that thought process is?
Yes. I was trying to figure out the direction that you were going in because I can answer this question so many ways.
Yeah.
Like any other artistic person, my husband needs to put the reins on me because my brain is going at 1,000 miles an hour on all the creativity that can happen.
Yes.
And this is what we have is me,
right?
Not going so wide. So what I do normally is for things that I would like to wear, things that I would like to wear is number one.
Yeah.
And then things that I can manufacture and sew myself to produce for my clients.
Yeah.
That limits me on what I can do, but it makes me more efficient for what I can supply.
Okay.
So those are two major things that I consider when I design.
Right.
And then since we are designing for curves, we also make sure that we consider fabric is very important, textile is important, because we only use stretch denim when we're doing jeans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for comfort, but it really needs to be functioning. And in a lot of denim companies in the industry use stretch denim, that has a slight break. It's slightly comfortable. But we tend to use a lot more stretch, and it's a fitted jean, and so that women can actually function in it. So functionality is also important.
Yeah, no, I think that's the right. I'm sorry, Stacey, did you have a?
Well, just on the fabric aspect, what we've learned is that the fabric itself needs to mimic sort of the movement of the skin, and you have to take in muscle girth and movement and how those muscles move. So there's a lot of thought process that goes into the fabric as it relates to the body itself.
Right.
How the shape and the line and the contour are going to move smoothly and transition, well with the body.
Yeah. Do you use models for that? Is that done? Is a lot of that done computer assisted? Is just sort of common sense, or?
My number one model's right here.
So I test out the product.
Then you figure out from there how to generalize to different types, different body
Yes.
types.
Yeah. I test out the patterns, and then I also use clients, and then we do have models that give us feedback from everything that we do.
Yes.
And that's a point we'll get to in a minute when we talk about the patents, because obviously I don't know how many different body types there are. We could make I guess some people might think that every individual has their own body type, right? So this raises some interesting questions about the patenting and the marketing and so forth.
Yeah.
But that's very helpful. I think Valdavia's answer and responses really got to where I was thinking of going with the question, and that is, your business model is really based upon a perceived need, right? So it's not like you're trying to say everybody should be wearing this next season. They should be wearing this because there's a need in the marketplace for it. So this gets back to the first question. That is, how did you first perceive that need, and how would you describe that need? I mean, you talked a little bit about that, but when you first started the business and thought about this niche in the marketplace, how did what experiences, what background led to you identifying that need?
Well, for me, because we got these epiphanies at two different points in life. So for me, to tell you the truth, I just wanted to be a designer that made some impact.
Yeah.
And so I actually prayed about what it was that, what was my purpose, or what was I supposed to do. And so after praying, I heard that I was supposed to make clothing products for the body of African descent. And when I heard it, I was like, okay, that is different. And I am of African descent, and I definitely have a typical body, smaller waist, fuller thighs, for gluteus, and I have issues fitting clothing. And so it made sense to me to solve a problem that I could relate to, and that I knew I had a point of reference.
Right.
So that is how I got started with this. And so I began to pursue that from that point of view.
Well, mine is a little different. I was still a student at Howard University, and at the time, I was trying to figure out what to do and where I wanted to go, because I was a student at School of Architecture. I initially wanted to design something that was impactful and changing, to the point where building a city where it was well run, sort of like a smart city. But at the time, and I was doing some modeling too. And so what I realized is that there were some, I don't want to call it necessarily biases, but there were some perceptions within the fashion industry. When I was doing shows and things like that, I realized that when I was putting on a garment, and some of the models that I was with were some of the same size and height as me, but the clothing had a little bit more adjustment issues on me than it did on my counterpart, who happened to be Caucasian.
Right.
And I found that to be consistent. And I ended up helping a friend of a friend do some sketches in New York. She was starting the fashion line. She was a student at one of the schools in New York. And I thought what she had was interesting. And so I did the sketches. And then, over a course of a couple of weeks, she ended up getting financed. And so what I noticed was that there's a process that needed to be undertaken for looking at fashion that needed, seemingly, in my opinion, needed to include everyone. Because for me, working in the industry, the clothing itself was beautiful. The fabrication was excellent, and the execution of the design was there. But for whatever reason, like my wife said, it didn't seem like it included me. It was always extra, because they don't sell clips. You see large paper clips and things of that nature when you buy clothing. But why was I wearing that when I was walking down the runway or in a photo shoot? And so what I realized is that there was no research or evidence that there was an inclusive design model for people that look like me, or anyone that was not European, in their ethnicity or descent. So that's how I started. And then when I came back to Howard University, I talked with Val, and she agreed, and to my surprise and to my happiness at the same time, that she had switched her major from architecture to fashion. And so for me, that was all like a godsend, and that's what I prayed for, and I wanted us to work together, and that's what we did. And while before I actually went to New York, we backtrack 1 second. I met with a good friend of mine, Al Freeman. He was a professor at Howard University, and he just was talking to me. He's like, look at you in deep contemplative thought. What are you thinking about? And so I mentioned to him about this idea. And then he took me to, his friend who was the dean of the School of Business and the president of the university. And so we had this groupthink meeting, right? And their conclusion was that I should go elsewhere to find this truth and to research it, because I couldn't find it at Howard University. Mm-hmm. And I was, to say the least, I was very surprised at that advice. But it was the best advice that I got,
Right.
So, and
that's good. So you're one of the people who left school to develop your entrepreneurship spirit, and now is potentially giving back to the school. So that's great, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it was probably helpful for our listeners. We've had a separate conversation about this. That a lot of this was happening in the 90s, right? If I get the timeline right, and then
yes.
I think starting in the 40s, there was the PS 4270 standard that's for clothing, and so this is largely for off the rack. And I guess even in the 90s, we still didn't have the bespoke, the individualized clothing model that maybe we're getting to, and we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. But do you want to talk a little bit about the PS 4270 standard before you start moving into your IP work?
Well, the PS 4270 was created by the Department of Commerce back in the 40s. What it was a voluntary product standard that worked with the manufacturers and retailers at that time in America, and I think there were a few internationally, to create an industry. So the industry had to be created. So it was taking manufacturers and retailers, and they had to have a common goal. And so in order to have a common goal, they had to have a common consumer group, and they had to have a common industrial standard. So that's how we have what we have today. But if we, can be some quick studies of history, in the 40s, if you were not of, let's say, American Caucasian nationality, there was a non-inclusive discussion and implementation of policy to exclude others from their primary industrial or economic endeavors. When we started in the 90s, that problem, and it is a problem, still existed. That standard in this newest iteration is still being sold on the Department of Commerce's and this partner agency's websites to this day.
Right.
When you have in this world of 2018 the advancement of what we call the fourth industrial revolution.
Right.
Many people groups around the world from the 40s and even up until now were not included in the industrial revolution in the actual beneficiary category, right? They didn't benefit as other people did. And so, not to rehash history, but what we have to do is really take a look at where we are and take a look at what the PS 4270 and other standards like that, what they have created, right?
Yeah.
And we're not talking about just products. We're talking about making products for certain individuals. Well, the product itself doesn't really have a mind to say that I want to be worn on a certain people group, right? So that takes it's up to the designer. And, most of the design ideology, what they allow is for you to design for your intended consumer. You can pick your consumer. And in the fourth industrial revolution, with all this technology floating around, and with people in India and the continent of Africa and in Asia, able to go into a smartphone and look at any app or any website and look at a product and say, hey, I want to buy that. All the business models are in place and all the resources in place to get that product from the warehouse or the store in, say, New York to someone in Moldova, right? There's nothing preventing that. But what is preventing there from being a and experience from a consumer happiness standpoint is that we don't have an academic policy, we don't have an industrial policy, and we don't have a human policy of looking at each other equally in our industrial, economic, and our academic endeavors. We have to create a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift includes all of us in this model. We're in 2018, we can't have a 1940s mindset in the world that we live in.
Yeah, I think what that points to, what both of you set out, is that what you're doing is really part of a global phenomenon. You mentioned other countries, India, South Africa. I'm looking at the study from the African Development Bank on the fashion industry that's emerging in various parts of continental Africa. And so I think that's kind of very important to point out as we're thinking about the background to your business. And it's something that's coming up in Europe. You think about the 1940s, regardless of what the ethnic or racial background is, people are bigger now than they were in the 1940s.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people have different body types than they did in the typical prototype for the 1940s standard. So this is a really important issue in terms of how we think about new standards and how the fashion industry responds.
Yeah, there's a lot of study and research out there. Most recently, there's one by a company called Body Labs, which was recently purchased by Amazon. They do
have that in front of me. I was looking at that. We can send links to people who are interested. But yeah, please.
Yeah, they did a very good study on the economic value of proper fit and having fit, and it's in the billions of dollars. And we need to do something about that. It's just not here in America. It's in Europe. It exists everywhere where there's clothing and consumers.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I think they start off by saying, I don't know if the viewers can see this, but I'll read it. $62.4 billion, I think, based on 2016 numbers, or I'm not sure what the base is at, but still, whatever the timeline is, $62.4 billion, they say, worth of apparel and footwear returned due to the incorrect fit, right? Whether that's online or some other source of, and there's some really interesting studies here or details here about just the general satisfaction level with the clothing lines that are available, off the rack or through other means. And, one of the things, it's probably worth mentioning it here, it'll come up, I think, at a number of points, is, one response to all of this might be that why can't everything just be bespoke? Why can't everybody just get their own individualized tailor and, so whatever the equivalent of Savile Row is. And we'll talk a little bit about whether the industry is going there. Obviously, that's very idealistic. Not everybody can afford their individual tailor to do that.
Right.
And so we're going to be stuck with off the rack or some model that's like that. And I think what you're working on is how to adjust that model to a world that doesn't fit old standards.
Yeah, I mean, we're working on a mass customization model.
Right.
There are companies out there that's trying to, solve that from a manufacturing environment. Amazon, recently had a patent dealing with, custom ordering, more of the bespoke of what you're speaking of. Delivering that is another thing. They have, all the networks and logistics in place, to be able to warehouse and to customize that type of delivery model. But is that changing what they're delivering, though? Correct. Yeah. Will Amazon be able to deliver a pair of jeans for me that fit correctly based upon what they are using from the input of their product, which is the patterns? See, everything comes down to design, comes down to the patterns. And if that's, something that we really focus on, we really focus on the person and looking at the group and subgroups of each ethnicity, nationality, and the racial groups around the world.
Yeah, and so let's just finish up a little bit about the background of the business, because I didn't ask this, but it's probably interesting to know. Your distribution model has largely been internet-based, or do you work with retailers like Walmart or with?
No, I mean we tried to reach out, and we've been in many discussions and meetings over the years with companies that have brands and have their own chain of stores, but they didn't know how to retail it. There's an education level that needs to happen at the company level, as well as educating their consumers as well. Right. So that's where people were having some problems, and plus they were looking at the numbers that you mentioned about the returns and things of that nature. And there really is a problem discussing the consumer, especially the consumer that is not your typical, large population like in America is Caucasian. So people tend to go with the majority group mentality. But
and you mean people marketing? I mean, the marketing decisions,
yes.
The business decisions.
But see, when you open your doors, just like America, when you in any country, if you open your doors, you allow people to come in, you take the responsibility of making sure that every person that walks in the door can be serviced properly. And part of the service is knowing what the intended user is going to be or who they're going to be. And if you anticipate, say for Brooklyn is a very large, part of the economy of this, the city of New York and the state. But Brooklyn has a eclectic mix of people from all over the world. And you mean to tell me that if you have a store that has a population, say, of, 1 million people of African ancestry and 2 million of Caucasian, you're only going to make products that benefit the actual majority population? And see, that's where we are. That's what retail, that's what design, that's what industry, that's what they know. That's what they're taught. So there's an education level that needs to happen. And our business model is based upon, first and foremost, knowing and researching and designing in a different way, in an all-inclusive design model. And when you have that, then you invite people to your product. And we have a lot of great feedback. We're probably at, I won't say zero, but we have a very, very low return rate of our products. And that's a good indication that, we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point to end on this segment of our discussion, because the bricks and mortar world, we tend to forget it's standardized. And, the beauty of the internet, as you described it, the fourth industrial revolution is to kind of rethink these standards and maybe even move to one that's more flexible or even in some sense standardless, right? It's more individualized, more tailored, and
yes.
But again, this is worth setting up here because we'll talk about it in more detail. It can't be completely individualized. I mean, that's sort of the difficulty, and to reach that point. But we'll talk about that. And in some ways, you don't want it to be completely individualized, and that creates problems of its own in terms of how the marketplace operates. So that's great. I mean, with that background in mind, let's talk a little bit about some of your intellectual property strategy, some of your woes, and some of your victories, so to speak. I know you had some copyrights in some of your early designs. Is that correct? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. So what did you copyright, or do you remember what you had copyrights in, or?
The first one granted a copyright in 1999. It was a gene pattern.
Registered.
Yeah. We were developing at that time a gene because we were advised that the way to brand it and the most common product for branding in the apparel, industry would be denim. And so our first copyright was for the African body type, and that copyright allowed us to move forward and being able to understand in the U.S. That there's a large market, but we also needed to learn about IP and the strategy of IP. So copyright for fashion is not something that allows you that is under copyright law here in the United States. You have to go to Europe and some other countries to get protection under copyright for fashion. In particular, right. France is a leader in that particular field when it comes to enforcement and protection under the law under copyright as well. That's just something, that's why you see fashion, for the most part, coming out of Italy, coming out of Germany, coming out of Spain, and mainly the European countries, with the leaders being France, Italy, and the UK, mainly because of IP law, right? And you have a national strategy to protect those designs and treat them as assets, national assets at that. And to contrast that with the US, you can now protect fashion under design patent law, under what they call the Hague System or the Hague registration for the International Protection of Registered Designs. The U.S. joined a few years ago, and a lot of asset value can be created by protecting those assets of fashion. And because we're solving a fit problem, we are in a position where we have to understand and know IP protection laws wherever we're trying to solve the problem. And since we're trying to solve a global problem, we're getting well versed in global IP strategy and laws as they exist around the world.
Yeah, and so one of the early hiccups that you had involved trademark too, right? I think some of our listeners may have noticed the similarity between your surname and that of another fashion designer. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Names are important. I will say that first, and how we acquire names is another discussion. But yes, we had a trial in the test with Perry Ellis International. When we first started, the name of our company was Ellis Black. Of course, our last name is Ellis, and we were designing for what we were solving for was a solution for the black body type. So we put it together and called Ellis Black. Okay. But Perry Ellis International thought we were, infringing upon their trademark. And so for like almost 4 years, we went back and forth with Perry Ellis International about the name.
I think they were challenging your attempt to register Ellis Black. I think it was something called an opposition. Yeah.
Yes, they were challenging that. And so what I proposed to them was let's do a historical, genetic or maybe a historical analysis of the name. Maybe because since the advent of slavery here in the United States and in the Americas, maybe there's a possibility we could be related, and maybe this is a family issue. And so, they kind of backed off of that idea. But we ended up in the trademark court. And and so it was very interesting how that went. The decision took a lot longer than we all anticipated. They normally decide within a few weeks, 10 days, something like that. It took a few months. And so, one judge decided for us, one for Perry Ellis International, and one was neutral. So again, the law of the land, majority rule, and they decided to go with Perry Ellis International since they've been in business longer, had trademark that was put into the marketplace, and they had a value attached to the name. And so we ended up having to change the name, which worked out to our favor.
Is that where House of Made then came in, or did you have some other names before?
Well, the House of Made itself is a design and research and development company. Okay. And the name of the brand itself that we're now using is Beautiful Liberation.
Okay, there it is. Okay.
So
have you registered that, or?
Yes, that's a registered trademark, Beautiful Liberation.
All right. Okay, that's great. So those are the trademark and some of the copyright issues. And let's talk a little bit about the patent. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add one thing. That trademark case was very disturbing to me because it just seemed really weird that this large company would come after little us. Uh-huh. And while we kept trying to recruit or get legal representation, and they kept telling us, "Oh, you're gonna lose this. We'll just take your money, and it'll be a waste of money. Just give up and just change the name." And while in the end, if we had to pay someone, it would have been a waste of money from their point of view. Right. But we did our own legal answering and responding for 4 years. Yes. We did the legal, all of the legal work ourselves. And what we found in our research is that the trademark board had allowed, there were trademarks that were, for instance, like Charles Ellis or Perry.
Perry Adam Ellis or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So there were trademarks granted with either the surname or the first name for other people. And in our case, they were, arguing that it would be a confusion. And we were wondering, why was this list already granted of trademarks with these names on it, which is really weird, right? And that, was very upsetting. And of course, some other things took place, which you could probably research and figure out. There's a guy named John Welch.
John Welch, yes.
John
He's
Welch in Boston, who was a trademark, who wrote a blog about these types of cases. Mm-hmm. And we should have had that information up. I mean, you can go and check it out. But he made some comments about that case and how it didn't make any sense and how it was kind of weird and very suspicious. But that's something that, people can go on record and probably Google that information in his comments about that, because he's someone who is noteworthy when it comes to talking about these types of cases in trademark court. Right. Yeah, but
basically, even if it all ended up sort of okay, that was 3 years out of your life, basically, or 3 years out of your business.
They're pretty taxing, to say the least. We're not attorneys, but we had to learn a lot about law, about how to look at how to respond and things of that nature. And it just got to a point where it just looked like this was not about the trademark, just to keep it within the confines of the public information. It didn't seem to us, and then it was verified later on that it had a lot more to do with what we were doing versus the name of and what we were doing. And it opened up our eyes. We learned the value of our company at the time and what we were doing with the product, which led to us filing the patents and learning about international patent law and trademark law. So as much as it was troubling for myself and my wife, it actually helped us and propelled us into the world of IP in a more diligent, way, which got us to where we are now.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the patents, because that's frankly, that's how we met, right? Because I had written about your patent in an article and book, and I'm glad that at least you read the book, so that was reassuring for me. But I'm glad we were able to connect on this. But I'd written about, I think, this particular patent, which was your 2005 patent. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
So you want to give us a little bit of background on that? And I think you have already given us in the how it fit into your business plan, but how about in terms of your IP strategy?
You want to go take it? Well, this particular patent, as we mentioned before, was an invention for a system, a patterning system, and we created a method of assembly and manufacture for unique body type of the African, African descent. It allowed us to look at the body type, but also look at what is needed to make products for that body type, from the patterns, and then from the dress form, and then how do you manufacture that? The assembly, the shape and contours that were unique to that was very surprising, to a lot of manufacturers, which led us to where we are today. But that patent itself opened up a pathway of thinking for not only us, but for others, as well, about the uniqueness of, as you discuss in your book, about racialized patents. There was a lot of pushback from the U.S. Patent Office about this patent, because in their minds, we were trying to patent the whole human race, a certain race of people. And it had
body type, yes.
But we're just talking about body type, right? It's a method of making for that particular body type. And it was surprising to them, and maybe, they didn't understand, because that's not something that they were taught in school about the design process for different design people, We're designed differently. Now, we can work on, how that process works, what have you, but we know there is some type of biological design that is consistent, with certain, what we have created is racial groups, So if you look at what we call different racial groups, there's some consistency there in the shape, the line, and the contour of those groups. That can't be, negated. And if that's the case, then why don't we include those differences into a model of design that allows them to participate in the consumer marketplace as well on equal terms. And so this is what that first patent was all about.
And I think from there are a lot of really interesting, just pure patent law and policy and legal issues that are behind this. Let me make sure I understand. I think it's probably worth exploring a little bit. When you're talking about a patterning system, you're talking about things like, I think you sort of alluded to it, but let me put it at a level, since I'm not in the industry, something like a dress dummy, right? You need models like that are used in the process of designing and making clothing that are just embedding a standard, right? We talked about the PS 4270 standard.
Yes, sir.
So that standard that's been embedded doesn't incorporate difference or doesn't really allow for difference.
It doesn't allow for difference because the input thought process didn't consider the difference.
Right. And so what this system is not only things like a dress dummy, that might be one example, but also the way in which the particular machine or other types of tools used for design and manufacturing come into play.
Yes.
Is that a fair characterization? Or
yes.
So let me, I don't know whether this is devil's advocate or just looking at another position, because this is something we raised earlier. Because it's from the patent law perspective, when you're talking about a particular body type, I guess there's a question about, to use a legal term of art, whether this is too vague, because you want the patent language to be something that somebody can read and understand exactly what's being patented. What's the invention. So how would when you're trying to define this body type? Obviously the patent was granted, and you were able to overcome some of the objections. Did you rely upon, for example, anthropometric work? Did you rely upon? Because I know in our individual discussions you talked about how you have some very interesting background research, talking to anthropologists and other forensic scientists about body typing. Is that right? Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, you're correct. My wife and I, we did a lot of research and had a lot of discussions with, doctors who dealt with, cadavers and things of that nature. And one of the questions that we always ask is, how would you be able to identify a person when you're just looking at the skeleton? How would you identify that person? How would you know if that person was female of African descent, female of European descent? How would you know that? And there were certain body
looking at the skeletal form, not by looking at DNA, anything like that, right?
Yeah, and not even the skin color or the muscle propensity that the outward shape, but just the bone itself, because that's all you have. And so we're not looking at skin color. We're looking at frame. We're looking at bone length, density, and things of that nature, angles of bones and curvature of spine, which, again, down to the skeletal level, there are some unique characteristics that are present in different groups of people, And that's not, trying to put one group against another. It's just that we are human beings. And just like the animal kingdom, we come in different sizes and shapes and forms, but there's consistent base level skeletal and even muscle shape that is consistently being shown to be prevalent within the large portion of different racial groups.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this is obviously fairly controversial in terms of the underlying anthropology and the history of this, but I think what you're pointing to is that some of this is used in forensic sciences. They have to identify bodies, they have to identify remains, whatever it might be. And so there is this notion of a type that exists there in that science, in that area, that has some relevance for what you're doing in fashion. It's kind of a very macabre connection, I guess. But when we discussed about that, it was
if you can identify a person, right? Yeah. In that particular science, then if that is a truth, which it's a legal truth because they have to identify the body.
Right.
How is it consistently being used as an identification legal, process? Why can't that be used in all processes of identification?
No, right. It's interesting. Because I think, I haven't looked back at it, but I would imagine the patent examiner's objection in part was, what exactly does that mean? Is there a clear legal meaning to body type that that makes this patent.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty early with the naming of it when we started talking about body type, but that's the only conclusion you can come to, right? I mean,
I understand. I mean, right. I mean, this is the art of patent drafting, is you have to use language to get at what you're trying to talk about. I guess you could have talked about standard body type, or and that's something that I want to kind of move on to the next point. We have about maybe 10, 15 minutes left, but there's a lot to discuss. But let me accelerate this a little bit, because one comment on this that people might have would be, well, every individual has their own body type, so wouldn't the most important or the relevant business model be one where, and then subsequent IP strategy be one where you create some sort of a system where people could just scan their individual body type, whatever the existing technology would be for that, and then they would send it to the designer and manufacturer to come up with the clothing that would fit that. So it'd be really ultimate bespoke tailoring.
yeah.
So do you think that's feasible? Is that where the future is headed, or what would be sort of limitations on that? Because then you wouldn't have to talk about things like race or body type. It's just every individual has a type.
Well, the thing is, we have to identify the type, right? So whether we call that type, and we do have nomenclature for our different body types, and it's a body type identifier. So for us, that size 4 woman is a size 4, but when we mention the actual body types themselves, we have a nomenclature of NERO.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we identify each body.
NERO. What exact?
Yes.
What is that?
That's the nomenclature that we utilize to be able to body type each person.
You mean that in the fashion industry, in that industry, you use it?
Yeah. So when you have a case where, like I mentioned before, a size 4, and you have four different women, same size, same measurements, with different ethnicities and racial categories, we have to be able to identify it from a manufacturing standpoint.
Okay, right. And I think that's the key. I don't want to cut you off. I think that's something that's important. Why we talk about types or standards is that, this ultimate model of bespoke, clothing, even that assumes some sort of standards. So I know one of the things we talked about, you're using sort of 3D technology or thinking of moving in that direction, and you're developing databases, and I want to talk about that in a few minutes. But all of that requires some sort of standard in order for it to be functional or operational.
Well, anything you design, even if you scan the body, you still get a unique standard that either is for the individual, but you're not going to take that same person that you scanned and use that topographical information, I mean that pattern, those measurements, those contours and those lines for other people. You're not. So everybody has to have their own pattern, is what you're saying.
Right, and so that means, and the implication I'm getting at from that is that body typing is, and we can talk about it, but really that's not where the industry should be headed, especially if you're interested on this unmet need, right? Because then that ultimately meets the need for every single individual if you could do this.
Yeah, but that'd be, in my opinion, to try to make it for every individual uniqueness, you have to have a base standard in order to mass produce it. Because you're talking about time.
We're agreeing on that point. Yeah.
So you're saying that you're saying that if it isn't going to be feasible for people or for the industry to create individual body types by scanning people, and is that going to be scalable? It's sort of going backwards to like when people used to have to get their clothes made, or people's mothers and grandmothers were making their clothes. It's sort of going backwards. It'll be pretty hard to scale that.
Interesting.
And then what is the price on that? What are the price points for that? Like you talk about,
I think
kind of expensive.
I think those are all the relevant questions. I think that's probably right. I guess the only thing I guess a little bit pushback on is whether it is going backwards, because the idea would be that, as the technology develops, a lot of this will be cheaper to do, right? I'm not saying we're there yet, but maybe, whatever the point in the future would be, it's not like in every individual. I mean, it really is a question. The reason why the going back in time was so expensive was all the human labor that's involved, and maybe some of the new technologies. And again, admittedly, a lot of this is science fiction, would allow an individual to scan their body, feed it into their 3D printer with whatever the material they want, and voila, they have evening wear. They have stuff to go out that night in. But that's obviously far away. But I think the point I also wanted to get across, and I think both of you have mentioned, is that there's always going to have to be some sort of standard.
It is.
Yes.
It is. It's going to have to be some standard.
Even if you take all the human element about and automate it, there still has to be a standard, probably even more so.
Right, because even tailors take a basic suit and then they tailor it and cinch it in or adjust the shoulders and do all those things. You have to have something, and it's easier if you have a base for the different body types to adjust, even for us to customize.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, we can take that to a lot of different variations on this, and that is we've been talking about jeans or shirts, but I mean ultimately maybe all clothes. I mean the whole idea that we're talking about clothing in this way rather than just wrapping ourselves in cloth, right? Everybody wears a sarong or something.
That's always a choice.
It's a standard. I mean, right? I mean, so maybe in the future we'll be in a world where everybody can 3D print their own sarong. But I mean, there is going to be a standard even there that's implicit in what we talk about, and that's what I found interesting about this when I wrote the thing that I did that you came across, and that's what I find really interesting about this business model. So, do you want to talk a little bit about this design patent that you received a few years ago?
Well, the design patent is specific for a curved denim jeans for the different body types. And you can see the difference in the patent in the rise and front and the back for the different body types. You can see some of the pronounced curves. Some curves are more pronounced than others in the different body types. For us, and when we're talking to our clients and customers, we always want to emphasize that we're not biased for which is more beautiful than the other. We believe that we're all created equally beautiful. So just because one curve is not as full as another curve, it does not, diminish the value, the beauty of the individual or the person that fits in whatever ethnicity. It does not matter to us. We love what we do, and it's very important to us that our clients understand and know that what we do embraces the curves where they are, and in that individual. And so that's what this first this design patent is about. It's about capturing those curves of the different body types in the different ethnicities, and making sure that everybody has a garment that fits them equally beautiful.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. So that's the idea behind the design patent. And remember, a design patent for listeners is only covering the ornamental aspect of this. There may be functional aspects to this as well, but they're not covered by this particular design patent. And in some ways, it's what's interesting about the design patent too is I don't know. In some ways, you move away from the notion of body type. I mean, the body type might be sort of ingrained or hardwired into the the particular ornamental design that's being represented here, but. This is kind of, again, something we could spend a lot more time talking about, but it's interesting to just note it and maybe move on to some other things. So I think, Stacy, you mentioned that you received a patent last year. This is the application that I got this information from, but this has been granted. Is that right?
Yes. This one is for multiple body types and multiple articles of manufacture. And so what that means is that we've taken and improved upon the first patent. And now we've, based upon the all-inclusive design model that we have, we're able to really look at specific body types and look at the industrial, products that we made, for those particular body types. This allows us to create freely and in a more open, inviting way, without any, preconceived notions that there may be a group that we can't fit, because we're thinking about everyone in our design process, whether petite, tall, we have your athletes, you have people with the now called plus size or things of nature. So as long as you're human, that's who we're designed for.
Yeah, And just to kind of read some of this is really interesting because this will lead us to where we can kind of end some of our discussion with, and that is a method for manufacturing a garment includes creating a database of various body types. And so, did you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, we can continue or segue into the last section of this, which is on commercialization. You're doing a lot of things. We mentioned the 3D printing work a little bit, but you're also doing some things with social media. Is that right, to create this database?
Well, what we're looking to create is a solution that incorporates or envisions the whole hope of the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah.
It's all about data, right? Data and technology, and how do you use that in actual designs, products. And so what we're doing is working with a company, TC Squared, and we're doing a 3D body scan, pretty much revisiting the methodology used by the Department of Commerce to create the PS 4270. So we're creating our own in-house voluntary product standard, and we're collecting a very large database of body types by using the 3D scanner, compiling that database to be utilized for what you alluded to earlier about bespoke or custom fit. So we will have them on a database, and we want to create a community with that, because our solution is an invitation, and we want people to be more social as it relates to the industrial space. And we need to have a conversation about our unique differences, but the product itself is a beautiful product. And I think we can all rally around the beauty of a product so we can start seeing and inviting the beauty and receiving other people's beauty and uniqueness as well. And so we're really, looking forward and excited about the 3D scanning process, because, for the first time, we will have a database of people, but at the same time, our patents allow us to move forward with creating a in solution for those particular unique body types that we've scanned as well.
So you're basically using this database to create a new standard, just to kind of summarize it.
Yes.
How are you creating the database? I mean, is it obviously it has to be voluntary, but...
Yeah, it's voluntary.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, we're no Amazon, so we don't have perks of cash and things to so right now, that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, so that's how you're doing it, though. It's like getting the models and getting the images that way, and then creating this database.
And to that point, I don't think we're going to have an issue, because as you looked at in some of the data and some of the literature that you have, and what's available online, fit is a problem. So if there is a percentage of people with a fit problem, those are the ones that we're really going after. We want to solve a problem for them and globally, but also it allows us to educate, the consumer as well, the consumer marketplace, who may not have the habit of returning the garments because they love what they have, because they feel like they have no other option, so they just have to make do with what they have. There's a large percentage of people, especially women, that do that. They don't return the garments because they just think, unfortunately, because how the industry and marketing has been over the decades, they think something's wrong with their body type. And so this 3D scanning initiative that we're starting allows us to interact with those particular people groups, and allow them to know that we really have them in mind, when we want to create this product. And so we want to build a relationship.
Yeah, interesting. And then that will affect the way the product gets manufactured, designed, and then delivered, right?
Exactly.
We're a little bit over, but that's fine. We can go on for a little bit more. I just wanted to, I think there are a lot of really interesting commercialization issues that we've touched upon, such as identifying the product or service, explaining this idea of sort of either race-based or ethnic-based body type versus a fully bespoke, and the problems with both of those, or each of those kind of models in some ways, and now developing a broader notion of body type to create a new standard to challenge the ones that are existing. And we had some good discussions about branding strategies and the market environment. And I use the word technological threats here because I was thinking about a world where everybody just has their own 3D printer and can make their own clothing. I mean, everybody does what you're trying to do. And so that's interesting whether we'll get there. I mean, I think there's always going to be a technological divide that will create the need So I do want to wrap up a little bit, but I thought the best way to wrap up is to end with any final words about what you've been working on, any final thoughts that you'd want to leave the audience with.
Well, again, like you,
both of you too.
yeah. Well, right now, what we're working on is expanding our IP in markets where we know that we've identified an actual fit need, and especially in countries that don't have their own industrial standard as it relates to fit and, basically, standardization system.
Right.
Countries like India, China, we're looking at Nigeria, places in the continent of Africa, Brazil as well, a very interesting place. And so that's what we're looking at and identifying those market areas where we can have an entryway, first with the IP strategy that supports our business, motivation. And then from there, looking at how we can commercialize and be able to, manufacture and industrialize, the product. And all of that entails a lot of work, a lot of research. We thankfully have people who are industry experts who are advising us and looking at this as the future.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, we're going to have continuing conversations about this.
Yeah.
Valdavia, do you have any parting shots or parting
I
thoughts?
do. I do.
I thought you might.
The idea of bespoke and sort of breaking people up into groups so that they can have more specialized, their needs can be attended to. This is not foreign in the medical industry. They're starting to, customize medicine for people. My husband and I do a Eat Right for your blood type. That's customized for, your blood type. And we see the benefits. This is just natural. And it's, as you have compassion for, I guess, just the human race, you don't want to just do things for profit. I mean, you should not just want to do things for profit. And if we can just take time to look at each other as individuals and as humans, then we try to make the best product, do the best service, and be the best people so that what we offer is the best. Mm-hmm. And that's what we strive to do. And like you said, technology is going to continue to customize things and figure out a way how to do it the best way. And as long as we keep in mind that we should not just be doing things for profit and that we take time to see one another and figure out what it is that's needed, profits come, and people get better and things get better and technology advances. So I think that's what's very important for us. We never started this out just for money, and we certainly are not just doing it for money because it has not been profitable in terms of what the industry would say, because we decided not to follow that path because this is something that we have to commit to because we see other people and we want other people to understand that they are seen and that they are important. And so, yeah, that's what's important to me, that we need to make sure that we have our priorities right and understanding that people are important, everybody, no matter what ethnicity, no matter what race, no matter what group they are, that we are important. And that as innovators, we need to understand that in order to be better innovators.
Well, thank you. That's a great way to end. I want to thank both of you, Valdavia and Stacy, for taking the time to speak with us out of your busy schedule. I know this is, as far as the three of us, this is part of an ongoing conversation. So I look forward to talking with you again offline, and maybe in the future we can celebrate your next milestone online as well. So thank you again for taking the time. And for the people who are watching and listening, love to get your comments and questions. You can either contact me at the email address that's given here, or Stacy, you're also available for any follow-up questions or inquiries. You can follow up at this email here for Stacy, as well as you can take a look at the website. So thank you again for taking the time. I look forward to our continuing conversation. And off screen, thanks to Joel for his patience and the technical matters. So
Thanks, Joel.
have a good day.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you, Shuba.
And thank you, Shuba.